My father's name was Andrew Thomas McNamara, Jr., and he grew up in Cranston, Rhode Island, the son of an immigrant barber who owned the Crown Hotel's barbershop in Cranston. My dad went to West Point in 1924 and he graduated with the class of 1928. Academically, he did not fare so well. It was a huge engineering background and courses of instructions there, and he was not that well prepared to do that. However, he was a good athlete and played baseball and also hockey at West Point. So his grades weren't that great, but he graduated 8th from the bottom. But we always say that's better than not graduating. First assignment was Sackett Harbor. And at Sackett Harbor, he was the post-bachelor, and with those duties came that after the normal duty hours, he was on call for the commanding general and the commanding general's wife for any activity that he might be called for. I know after that, he was sent to subsistence school in Chicago in 1935. And that's the year that my brother was born. Most of the stories that I have about Dad in North Africa came from friends of my father who served with him and were always at the dinner tables whenever they were in town. They came, and I remember Major Jim Loftus, who would tell Tom and I stories, combat stories about Dad. And one of them was that the first time that Dad ever drew a pistol in combat. And there was a French engineer of a railroad in North Africa that refused to take the supplies that Dad had on a train to go to a certain location because the French engineer was afraid that it wasn't safe. And Dad tried to ensure that the man understood what he was talking about and the directions that he was getting from my father. And the Frenchman needed some more impetus, and my dad drew a revolver and pointed it to him and said, "You, sir, will do as you are told." And that was French enough for that guy. He certainly did get on, but those are the kind of stories I did get. Dad served under General Friedenthal, but he was relieved, and General Patton came in at that time, and Dad became the quartermaster for 2 Corps under General Patton and received letters of commendation for Dad's work in supplies under very rigorous military operations, particularly because of the loss of the Battle of Catherine Pass and the constant movement back and forth of which Dad had to ensure that his supplies were not captured by the Germans. So he, according to Patton, did a masterful job. My father did serve under General Bradley, and General Bradley selected my father to become First Army quartermaster because of his performance in North Africa and Sicily, and also the recommendations of General Patton on how my dad performed under combat and did his operations in North Africa on those certainly moving lines of engagement because of the loss of Catherine, and then the others, the amphibious movements that the troops made that Dad supported. Dad had a great affinity for anticipating, Murphy's Law or what could go wrong. And early on, and also in North Africa, with the changing battle lines and everything, Dad was concerned, particularly that if there were a breakthrough at Catherine Pass, that a lot of his depots that were stored would be overtaken and captured by the Germans who needed rations and gas. And so just a few days before the loss of Tobruk, he had moved all his supplies and he brought them back into safe locations behind the lines, of which he was awarded a citation from General Patton for that. But for the Battle of the Bulge, again, he thought that when he saw the panzers and the movements, that they were going to his depots also to get the millions of gallons that he had stored there for use of the panzers. And had the panzers gotten those supplies, it is thought that and documented that the war probably would have lasted 8 more months, because they would have split First Army and the Brits and gone right to the ports along the coast. And Dad ordered the MPs to stop every truck within the First Army area and offload it at wherever the truck was, and report to his depot where he had 3.75 million gallons of gas stored. It was all in 5-gallon cans, so there was a lot of effort that they had to do to get those empty trucks filled and move them laterally into other safe locations so that the Germans could not get that fuel. And he got all of it moved except for very little, which they set ablaze. But that was just about 2 or 3 miles from where the lead panzers were. So he was decorated for that and the anticipation. Dad thought out of the box and anticipated what could go wrong and might go wrong, and reacted accordingly. And both in North Africa and at the Battle of the Bulge, he was spot on. Dad landed at D+3 in Omaha Beach. He was supposed to go in earlier, but because of the storms, he could not. And he was very anxious as to the status of what was going on. And of course, he couldn't get to the radios because of all of the combat traffic that was going on. And we think that, that he may have had the first pigeon message carrier operations at the beginning of World War II. He sent a message by pigeon over to Utah Beach to his units there to find out what was going on. And that's the kind of information that he could get, because he couldn't get on the radios. The other actual tactical operations were all over the radios, and he couldn't get on. And that may have been the first pigeon messaging of World War II. Also, he had ordered that no bodies be buried on the beaches there because of the tide. And when he got there, there were hundreds of American dead, and there was a general officer there that said for the troops to bury them. And of course, Dad couldn't say anything, but he waited until the general and the troops moved out, and then had them moved up onto the cliff later on. And that was the beginning of the cemetery that everybody now sees over in Normandy. That's Dad. And he had them placed that they were pointed west towards home, so that they were looking back to the United States. I didn't really know until I read an article in Army Times. I had read this article of Army Times that said that Andrew McNamara, Quartermaster General, is now going to be the Commanding General or Deputy Commanding General of 8th Army in Korea. And I didn't really understand that it was a holding type of a job for him to go to a Defense Supply Agency, which was just going to be formed, that he was going to come back from Korea to do that, because I'm sure that he had to be in the nominating process and everything like that. And I was concerned because my dad was Quartermaster General, and he's going to go and be Deputy Commander of 8th Army. And I had talked with him shortly by phone, and he said, yes, General Malloy, who was the Army, 8th Army commander, but also the commander of everything in forces in Korea, was going to have Dad run 8th Army while he could do all of the other interfaces that had to be with the Korean forces and the State Department, and Dad would take this burden off his shoulders. Dad and Mom both talked to me about being the first director of Defense Supply Agency. Dad from one standpoint, Mom from another. Dad mostly from the standpoint of trying to start from scratch, to organize and get into motion on a very quick notice a new agency in Washington. He was assigned, temporary barracks, and in order to get people to come to work, he sometimes had to escort the women from their cars in the parking lot into their offices and then out as the director. He just had a handful of staff. But the rats were so big, they were in these temporary quarters in Washington, D.C., that the people were scared, or the ladies were scared to even work there. And so the barracks or the facilities were the worst that one could have. And even OQMG over by Fort McNamara were in these temporary quarters. So that was one aspect of it. My mother told me that he had lost a lot of friends and a lot of acquaintances because that he accepted this job as the first director, and that even as the ex-Quartermaster General, he was a Judas Iscariot for taking it because of the missions that would be usurped from the various other Army, Navy, and Air Force that were controlled by them and would now be under the Defense Supply Agency. And how could he, as a quartermaster and a supply officer, accept a job that would do that? But Dad accepted the task, the responsibilities, and knew and felt that it was the right thing to do to save money and to be a single manager and single ownership of all of these things. Why continue to have three separate organizations do it? And that was under Secretary McNamara, who also streamlined Ford and the entire defense as Secretary of Defense. And so there were many pitfalls, but he accepted the task, and he did the task, and he thought it was right. As a matter of fact, when he left the Army and retired for 13 years, he brought, his penchant was to bring the military-industrial complex closer together, and he did that for 13 years as the director of the Defense Supply Association. That was his job. He turned down a lot of jobs that were very lucrative job offers to accept the job at hand and to continue to work to streamline supply and logistics operations even after he left the Army. Andy McNamara was called the Black Buckle Man. And the reason that he was called that is that DLA or DSA at the time tried to get a black belt buckle for the combat fatigues. made and issued to all of the services instead of the brass buckle. The brass buckle, of course, shined, and the uniform at the time was for you to be out in the field and in combat operations, and nobody wanted to have something that's very shiny, going in combat for obvious reasons. That's why lieutenants took their bars off, their lieutenant bars off their collars and things like that, and subdued them so that the enemy, couldn't see anything shine. Well, he was taken to task, and thought that this was an entire waste of money to have a black belt buckle. And even today, if you go around any military post, here they are going in their BDUs with their shiny belt buckles and starched and pressed, I call them fatigues, but combat operations clothing, which really belong in the field. But they're all dressed up, and now they're the duty uniform as they were. He thought, and others thought, that the belt buckle should be subdued, but because of the cost and trying to issue it and everything like that, he was put to task. When the question came up was why Battle Creek for the operations there, I thought also maybe of rail. When we were stationed in Washington, D.C., and I was in high school, every time we would go across the 14th Street Bridge, Dad would point to the railroad bridge there and said, "You know what, Bill? That's the only link that we have on the entire eastern seaboard from Florida north by rail. And that bridge is the only bridge across the Potomac at that time that could handle any throughput should any mobilization ever happen." And of course, that's what he was planning for, even when he was First Army Quartermaster or anything, the what ifs of if the balloon went up. At the time Dad was in DSA, there weren't all of these highways and everything. They were just beginning to be constructed. And so Dad was, in my thought process, was relying on rail in case of mobilization. And so my answer is I think maybe rail. You asked me why I came into the Army, why I became a soldier. I think it was because of how my dad was and how his compatriots were, and our life as I had mentioned, growing up in all the numerous post camps and stations that we were assigned to. It was wonderful. I saw how wonderful it was for my father, and how interesting it was being at the as a dependent, and so I thought it was the right thing to do. I talk primarily about Korea because I was up at Moonsani, right along the DMZ, with the 4th Cavalry, the 1st Cavalry Division, and we were there, and we were getting our food. Of course, was good. However, we didn't get much steak, and we were getting a lot of liver, lots of liver, and I hate liver. And I'm telling you that we were getting it 2 or 3 times a month. Finally, I jotted a note to Dad, and I said, "Hey, Dad, what is the deal with us, having to eat liver 2 or 3 times a month? Because that's what we're getting." And I didn't get anything back. But later on, I found out that Dad did some checking, and the troops down at the rail crossing where we were getting the supplies from Saigon, from Seoul were sending the rations up, and the troops there were sending the liver up to our locations, and they took all the steak. They had steak for breakfast, they had steak for lunch, and they had steak for dinner. So Dad finally did get it back to me. He says, I did some checking. You should be eating some steak now. So that's basically what I can tell you about subsistence that I got direct support from higher up. Tom and I had tours in Defense Logistics Agency. My brother Tom. Tom lived at Fort Lee or in Petersburg and had reserve assignments with DLA. I had 4 years in DLA. I was Assistant Inspector General and went around searching for waste mismanagement and fraud, and had 4 wonderful years with DLA, which was my last 4 years on active duty, and I was out of the Alameda office, the Western region, for Defense Logistics Agency Inspector General. Mentioned Mom, and I mentioned my brother Tom and myself. My nephew Mark Johnson, an ex-J3 and not too many years ago, of DLA, grew up in McNamara clan. He is the son of my classmate, Bill Johnson, William Johnson, who was killed on our first tour in Vietnam as a Ranger advisor. He was in 2 Corps, I was in 3 Corps. And he called in artillery on his location because he radioed that he was mortally wounded. He and his team were mortally wounded, and that was the last message that came over the air. His son, Mark, became my brother Tom's son, but not by blood, because Patty and I, my wife Patricia and I, got married at West Point in 1967, and we invited Bill Johnson's widow to the wedding. My brother was the best man, and so they met at our wedding and our reception, and carried forth. And because of Mark being the son of a GI or an officer killed in combat, we did not want to lose any of the privileges that he would have from that. And so he never became Mark McNamara. He was Mark Johnson, but raised from the age of 2.5 by my brother and Caroline, his mother. And so never took the McNamara moniker or be part named McNamara. But he is very much the grandson of Andy McNamara, and he is very much my nephew. Congratulations, Admiral Skubik and all of DLA for 60 wonderful years of all the accomplishments that you have done worldwide and in supporting the warfighter. But not only have you supported the warfighter, but you have gone out for every catastrophe or for even this pandemic that we have, and how many people know what DLA has done in those efforts. Yes, it's per ipso facto about supporting the warfighter, but how about what you're doing right now, day to day, to keep the nation free of COVID-19 and for any potential catastrophes like you have in hurricane support worldwide, wherever FEMA goes or wherever the United States or the nation needs help, you know, DLA is right there rolling up their sleeves. And I'm sure you're back there rolling up the sleeves right now with what's going on in Afghanistan. And so thank you from the bottom of the McNamara family, who love you very much. A very happy, happy birthday and a big Army. Hooah! And for you, Admiral, fair winds and following seas.